Today, Kitty Vidi Lake is one of the most familiar and beautiful places in St. John's to visit. Every summer, thousands gather there for the Royal St. John's Regatta. But almost 200 years ago, these waters became the center of a very different story. I'm Helen Escott, author and crime historian. On the evening of Friday, August 29th, 1834, 39-year-old William Burns, a shoemaker from St. John's, was returning from the Grove Farm. He never made it home. For several days, no one knew what happened to him. Then, on Tuesday, September 2nd, his body was discovered floating in Kitty Vidi Lake. The surviving historical record is frustratingly brief. A coroner's record from that period states simply that William Burns, age 39 and a shoemaker, had been murdered and that his body had been thrown into the lake. But that single sentence leaves us with so many questions. Who killed him? Why? And what happened to William between the time he left the Grove Farm and the moment that his body was discovered in Kitty Vidi Lake? We know that Burns was not simply a name on an old crime report. He was a real man who had built a life in St. John's. Historical records indicate that William Burns married Eliza Perkins in St. John's in 1829, and remarkably, his name appears in the city's records just 1 year before his death in 1833. William Burns was listed among the petty jurors of St. John's. A petty juror is a member of an ordinary trial jury. They listen to evidence in a civil or criminal court case and decide what the verdict is. Could this be why he was targeted? Then in 1834, his life ended violently. Imagine St. John's almost 2 centuries ago. There were no forensic laboratories, no surveillance cameras, no DNA testing, and no modern police investigative techniques. A murdered man was pulled from a lake, and investigators had to rely on witnesses, physical evidence, and whatever information the community could provide. Today, we can stand beside Kitty Vidi Lake and watch rowers race across the water, surrounded by cheering crowds. But beneath those waves is another chapter of St. John's history. A 39-year-old shoemaker named William Burns disappeared one August evening in 1834. 4 days later, his body was found floating in the lake. And almost 200 years later, the most important questions remain unanswered. Who murdered William Burns and why? The case has never been solved.